All right, you guys ready to keep working on the sports logo? So we need to construct some background elements here. And in the past when we've done this, when I did the Sharks version, I'll link to all the versions of me doing this. Every semester it's a little bit different, but sort of riffing on the same ideas. One of the concepts here is that, we created this wall that has two of the team colors, and it's not just a cube. You can see that it's a little more intricate than that. It's actually cut out around the logo shape, so that when that part gets rotated, it looks a little bit more interesting than just a flat cube. Another reason is that we're not trying to make this photorealistic in that we're fooling someone into thinking it exists, but especially when you're doing 3D stuff like this, one of the stylistic choices is whether or not objects will pass through each other, right? And in this case, it can be, the physicality of the object can be communicated if things don't, just randomly phase through each other, right? That's how they actually work in the program, right? The program doesn't care, for the most part, if things intersect with each other. But as a way to sort of communicate that this could be an actual thing, or that it was more crafted in that way. we can cut things out. And we'll look at a couple techniques here to do that first. That is essentially accomplished via a spline mask. Spline mask is a C4D object that allows you to mask some things. Let me show you how that works. So I'll do a real simple one here first. It's essentially Boolean logic for splines, meaning that we can add or subtract the splines. So I have two splines here. I grab them both from the spline primitive menu. And where is the spline mask? In here? No, it's in here. Spline mask. I'll put them both in there. And you see we get that by default, right? It's essentially this plus this. If you look at the spline mask, the two ways, there's a couple different options here, but either union or subtract. And so if I go to subtract A, subtract B, now I have the circle shape, but the square shape is being subtracted from the circle. If I come up here and switch to B subtract A, I get the other inverted version of that. And so this allows me to pretty easily combine splines in this kind of way. Again, both splines need to be a child of the spline mask object. And if you look at the spline mask, you also need to be careful about what axis it's working along. Since these are flat two-dimensional things, they are both on this flat forward plane, which is the XY plane, which is the default it's set to, which is why this works. If I were to switch this, you see it stopped working because now it's looking along a different plane. This will be fine because this is the axis that we set up the logo on. So that should be less complicated. And so for instance, to do that wall like we were talking about, where there's a cutout, I'll look for the outermost shape, right? So it's this gray one here, which is sort of the foundation for the whole thing. And I'm just going to grab that one and put it over here in this empty, so we can see that, right? So here's just that outer shape. And so now I'm going to get rid of that circle. I'll move this rectangle over, right, and sort of line up what I would want. Something like that. And let's put this in there. And we get what I'm talking about there. Now we have this spline. So this could sort of be one half of the wall. I could copy and paste the whole thing. And so now I have these two shapes. The spline mask is green because it's a generator object and it uses other objects as input. But it's a spline, so it can be extruded the exact same way that all of our splines have been extruded. So you can, instead of just putting one spline into the extrude object, you can put the whole thing into the extrude object, which is here. So for instance, like so.
Where is extrude object? I have no trouble with that.
All the green objects we've used up until this point are here. This is the subdivision surface object.
Generators, but extrude specifically.
Yeah, extrude is right there. And spline mask is right here. Those are the two that we used. We also used this one. That's what happens when we just drag in the Illustrator file. So this is.
It says linked files, and you can't do anything with it if you don't know what
linked files.
When you drug your Illustrator file in,
Yeah.
it said linked files.
Yeah, but every one I wanted to use. I had to ask Bill to do it. Get me out of that. And it's not the way I want it. I don't want to have that to be the solution. To have to ask her to do it for me because I didn't know how to get it. She did a trace. Anyway, I scrapped that one because it's something I didn't know how to do, so I went to a different one.
Okay.
That was easier. Linked file. But we could do that later.
We'll do the same thing here with the curve. I think mine was like 0.3. That gives me a little bit of rounding around the edges. Right, and so now I've got these objects that I can animate, and the other shape fits into them. Which one is this? Let's move the anchor points. So I'll go to anchor point mode. That's the right one. So I'll label this right wall. Anchor point mode. Just move that over here. This will be the left wall. And move the anchor point over so I can see what I'm doing. Let's get out of anchor point mode. And now I could take these things and copy and paste them back into my project. And so here I have the two walls. Because I didn't move that spline, everything sort of fits in there already, which is cool. I can move this back, E. A few things stylistically to avoid here is that we do not show backstage. When we create these elements, we want to make it seem like this is a continuous space. And so if the wall is only so big and we zoom the camera out, we sort of see beyond it. And I would encourage you to extend things so that they, as we move the camera around, I suppose we'll do that coming up here, that things are extended out in all directions. Let's look at one other spline command that's going to help us here. And I'll come back over to this example one. And if I go to point mode, remember if we do any editing of the splines, you have to be in point mode and have it selected. If I go Control A to grab all the points. There's a super useful one here called Create Outline. Create Outline, if I run this on this command here, so if I right click, say Create Outline, it gives me this window. It's going to outline the existing spline this distance away. Now my scale is pretty small, so I'm going to say like 0.1. And I'm going to say Create New Object. And if I apply this, you see it outlines the existing spline. This is super handy. In fact, we could use this to sort of create another design element doing this type of thing. Came back here to create outline. Maybe this time it's a little bit further away. Now, your mileage may vary. You see that with the first create outline was fine. Let's turn this one off. The first create outline was fine, right? Because it wasn't that far. The second one, I told it to outline a little bit further away, and because of the shape, And because the shape primarily has this concave, inlet here, like things start to overlap, right? It's not that smart. So let's do a little bit of spline editing here. How would we fix this? I think you would probably want this part of it filled in so that this shape sort of continued around. And so we can do that if we're in point mode, selection. We can come in here and sort of grab the points that we don't want and delete them. And so these 2 points here, I could just sort of manually wrangle. Could grab this one and move this one over here, grab this one, move this one. Make sure I'm moving it only on that plane, right there. And now I have a more coherent, outline to what's happening here. Something you could do with these is sort of stair step them. It's too much offset. Let's say 1. Let's say 0.1. There we go. So I'm just taking each one, putting in its own extrude. And so this could be something that sort of surrounds our object here. If you kept running the create outline, you could sort of create some bigger cascading of the shape here. But those are 2 useful spline tools for this one. That the Spline Mask is super useful. And then this create outline. Create outline actually outlines the whole object, right? So it's looking at the distance from the spline and then projecting that point out in that distance. If you were just to scale it, you wouldn't get the same kind of results. It wouldn't actually go out in all directions. It would just sort of scale from one central point, which doesn't give you the same sort of clean outline. So in this case, we see that we're not quite getting a clean hole here in the wall. It'd be good if we had a little bit more breathing room. There's 2 reasons for this. One that we kind of glossed over on Wednesday is that we talked about you need to have rounded corners, right? No matter what you're doing with the design. Sophia, why do you need rounded corners?
Because by default it's 2 vertex.
Yeah, there's no light reflecting off of those corners, right? Which is a big part of this sort of glossy ESPN sort of look. However, when you round the corners, there's this issue of, is the rounding ending at the spline barrier or is it starting at the spline barrier? And that's actually down here at the bottom with this bevel outside checkbox. You can see that I'm just adjusting the very far outside one now, the gray one. That changes the width of these things depending on whether it's inside or outside. Depending on the logo, this may be more critical for some rather than others. There may be some unacceptable distortion of the shape if you're actually extending it beyond where the original edge of the spline was. In this case, with mine, because mine pretty much comes out from the middle, I think this works okay in our interest. but it'd be great if there's some more space here so it looked like this wall didn't intersect with what's going on. And we might be able to do that here with our spline walls by using a create outline here to create some more space around the actual object. And so I'll go into point mode and grab all of those points, say create outline. I'm going to say point 1. And I'm going to say create a new object. Otherwise, it's important to understand multiple spline pieces can be in one object. Just let me riff on that for a second. Right, so if I go into, there's all these procedural splines here, but if I come over to the spline drawing tools, like the sketch, and we're to start drawing a spline, I'm drawing multiple splines here, but because this object is selected, they are all contained within this object. So just because a spline object does not mean it needs to be continuously connected, right? You can have, I could split these up into separate things by explode segments. Right, so all these tools kind of overlap a lot with Illustrator as far as ungrouping, and the same kind of stuff happens. And so that explode segments now takes all those splines that were part of one object and bounces them all out into separate objects. Which is why, in order to avoid that kind of confusion, when I ran this command on the create outline, I wanted to check this box so that the new outline became a separate object, so it was easier to figure out and wrangle in the object manager. So I'll apply that. And the spline mask, only 2, right? It's only 2 objects. It's essentially either addition or subtraction. We can't do subtraction over multiple objects like that. And so I need to drag this one out of there. And that gives us more space, certainly.
Did you mean that? What do you mean by only 2? When you have many layers, I'm not sure what you mean by that.
That this only works properly when there's 2, this minus this, only 2 things, right? If you want to create multiple subtractions or multiple additions, you need to sort of cascade multiple objects.
Where is the create outline? Right click on what, please?
When you're in spline, when you have a spline selected, you have to be in point mode,
Right.
and then I've just been hitting Control A to grab all of the points, and create outline is there. Although create outline is a command, so it should also come up with Shift V. Shift C, create outline. Yeah, comes up right there. And so in this case, where it's something, if I'm going to be using it a bunch, again, I can take it out of the Shift C menu and drag it up into my interface. And so now, if I want to get back to it, I can just press this button. Right, so that gives me some more room. Now, if we look at this, like this fits into the wall a little bit better. I'm going to turn these off once just to see where my splines are. Oh, I just accidentally hit this button. That's what's going on. So, see how the logo fits? There's a gap in there now. It looks like this fits into that. That's a bit better. Let's do the same thing over here. Just grab this one. Point mode, Control A. Create outline. Apply. And then drag out. This is the new one. The new one always has the number on it. Or if it already has a number and you run another command, it just increments a number, so it would be Spline 2. If I drag that out of there. And make sure I'm in that rounding. There we go. Cool. The other thing students do a bunch here is that we want to make it seem like the real world. We made our 2 target lights. That's good. But the target lights by default are usually pretty narrow. And so I definitely open these up. So I grab the light and I'm in object mode. And then I get the little yellow dots, and I can spread this out so that by default, this part over here is completely unilluminated, right? So it's totally black, which just doesn't look that great. Same thing over here. I'm gonna make this one in. I'm also gonna move the angle here, so that they're both not exactly opposite from each other. Move one down a little bit, take the other one, maybe move it up a little bit, just to give my shadows some asymmetry, something that's a little more interesting. And also, in order to make the light more interesting, I don't remember if I did this on the San Jose one or not. You see this in a lot of advertising campaigns now where when we're lighting things, especially if you're doing, film shoots next door, we have daylight and you have tungsten. Daylight is more blue, tungsten is more orange. But you see, there's one, it was like the Cox Giga, what did they call it, GigaNet or whatever it was. They did this whole advertising campaign where they had sort of blue light coming from one direction, orange light coming from the other. Just giving these some sort of tint helps. Now, just rule in general, a little light tint goes a long way. Okay, this is one area where people make a lot of bad decisions right away, where they're like, oh, I can tint the lights, and then we're doing this kind of thing where things get real wacky really quick, right? And let's not do that. So I'm going to go to use color temperature, which is how the lights are controlled in actual film shoots. And so if we go to the left, it's a little orange. If we go to the right, it's a little blue. And I'm just going to give it a taste, just a taste of blue. I'll take the other one, say use color temperature, and give it a taste of orange. Right, immediately, it doesn't necessarily look like blue and orange, but it's just way less antiseptic than perfect white. We've come across this a couple times, right? The default CG is too perfect. Looks cheesy, right? And so we can do all these things that you get for free in the real world, right? Like this white paint is, you know, white enough, but it's not, every pigment of the paint is not exactly scientifically equal, right? Whereas here, by default, that's kind of what's happening with things. Cool, this is looking more interesting.
Can we talk about the lights for a minute, or do you want to do that later?
Go ahead, let's talk about it.
I have a lot of trouble with the lights are way far away, and they just don't, they don't look like that. And when you often grab the point of the light and move it around like this, and I can't make that happen. They're stuck to the axis. And do you put an axis center on the light, and do you need a node for the light?
If you make the lights, if you make the target light,
Yeah.
right? That's step one. Make sure you have target lights so
Yeah.
that they point at the
Yeah.
target, right? And so, I mean, I'll do some adjustments here for the general like studio calibration of like where stuff is if things are too far away.
Just get them like way out. And I'm using the world axis, but then it's one of the tutorials said when you're doing studio, use this local axis. But and anyway, they were way out, way out, and I can't seem to get them to move in to make sense in a way that they make sense.
Well, it'll be, you can, I mean, you're doing the right thing, because once I come to this view, I am switching to world coordinates
Yeah.
so that I'm moving stuff flat to this plane, which makes sense for what I want to do here. But you move them in, if it would be too close at that point, it'd be a matter of just opening the light.
By grabbing what, in what mode?
You have to make sure that you're in, those little yellow
Yeah.
handles only appear if you are in this mode right here. In the light itself, it is these angles right here.
Is it object mode or model mode? Like, I don't know the.
Yeah, the default, so model, yeah. So, but even if, regardless of the mode, if you click on the light and go to details, inner angle, outer angle. Again, those are only going to be for the target lights, right? Because the target lights are essentially a spotlight with a target object, right?
So just grab the yellow dots. So how do you bring it in so close? Like, like I can't even see my logo when I create my lights. I don't know why I have a default that is miles away. It just starts to be very cumbersome every time I want to move it around, and I try to bring them in, but I can't. When I bring them in, they just go straight, and they don't go, like you used to be able to grab them at an angle and move all kinds of angles.
Yeah, I mean, when I'm just sort of messing around here, I am being pretty particular about which axis I grab, right? So either I'm moving on one
Yeah.
axis,
Yeah.
or I'm picking a plane
Yeah.
by grabbing these. I'm never just clicking and moving on all three, because this is the
Yeah.
three-dimensional movement using a two-dimensional tool problem, right? That doesn't,
So it's
just
the
doesn't
angle
work.
handles,
Yeah.
the
Yeah, so I mean, I have a lot of practice doing that, I guess, but yeah, I'm really picky about never.
that move, I just never make that happen. Okay, all right, so you got me.
Yeah, so I mean, and when you're in this mode here, we're primarily thinking about stacking things, you know, in this direction, right?
Mhm.
And so I'm mostly grabbing this handle here, which only moves them on the X and Y. So it's not going to get any closer or further away. I'm just moving it straight left and right, you know. And then if I need to back it off, I'll just go over the Z, and that moves it straight back and forward and back.
The Z and the X and Z, right?
Yeah,
And that's the what color, please?
Z is blue. And then the
Well, the blue handles the X and Y, right?
the blue, this thing, I don't
I don't know.
know if that has a name. If it does, I don't know what it is. Yeah, like, it is a little confusing that that's blue. I don't know.
Yeah, that confuses me. Why is that blue? It's
But,
X and Y.
but it's, you know, its location
Yeah,
is on this plane. which is the one I want to move stuff on. So,
See, I'm reading them as a perspective. I see they're not a perspective. Okay. It's not a perspective. Okay.
and the other thing to make the lights a little more interesting is not have them both be the exact same intensity. And so backing one off and making one, ideally, the one in terms of nomenclature, what I would write down is that the bright light is going to be referred to as your key light. And then the light that coming from the other angle here is going to be your fill light, in that it fills in the shadows created by the other light.
If you wanted to. So, and the axis, you put the axis center of the light at the point of the light, so at the start of the light.
Yeah, that should be where it is when you. Yeah, where the lights are pointed. Yeah, like all that work we did at the beginning of Monday's class to get everything calibrated and at 0, 0, 0.
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah, then if you make a new target light, by default the light target is at 0, 0, 0. I moved mine up a little bit, I guess, but that's what it points at. But I mean, they point at the light target, so even if it was off somewhere else, you can just move it to wherever whether your thing is. But you really do want your scene to be in the middle of the world. Otherwise, it's just going to be a total headache, moving stuff around, because you have to just, think like, okay, well, I'm actually way out here at 100, whatever. If you're in the middle of the world, all the math and relative positions become obvious. So, cool. Let's make another material. If we look at the sharks one, we talked about this before. I use the logo itself to create these patterns, right? So on Monday, we use that pattern to create some texture on the thing, right? One thing I did here, right? And you don't need to do the exact same thing I did, right? We're exploring. Because I'll leave the San Jose stuff up here. I'm doing a little bit different this time. I do it different every time. I did it different last semester. I think I did the LA Kings one. But I'm using the same sort of palette of stuff, as far as applying these textures. It makes more sense to put the logo textures on the wall because there's just way more surface area so you can see it, right? If you put the whole logo on one of these tiny parts here, you're not really going to see that, right? So let's do that. Let's come back over here. Let's label some stuff here. This is blue texture. What does PBR stand for? This is texture. I even made the beer joke 3 times. Physically based rendering, right? So that the sort of functions like light does in the real world. Anyways, we want another blue over here. Maybe I'll use the blue and the gray. I don't know. Let's see what makes this pop. Probably not the black. That's going to be too dark. I don't know. This is the light gray. And again, the materials in 25 are a little bit different. Instead of being down here along the bottom in the default, this little thing here opens and closes that materials window. And we want to keep the same color and the same setup. I just want a different bump map on this. And so I'm going to control drag this. And I'll call this blue logo. And if we double click on this one, that opens up all of the, instead of having to work down here in this tiny window, if you just double click on the material, it opens up all the material stuff in a separate window. Just, especially on a laptop like this, makes it easier to see what you're doing. Let's come over here to bump. This is where we put the pattern, right? One of the tile patterns before. Let's switch it out. And so I'm going to go to load image and find my download of my hockey logos. Here we go. This is the Vancouver team. And now, before we use the EPS to get going, right? Because that is a, what kind of file, Sophia? That's right. But now we don't want the vector, we want pixels, right? Because we're going to use, in general, you don't put vectors on a material. That, not a separate vector file, for the most part. You're using pixels. And so we'll grab the PNG file. And now, let's go ahead and apply this blue logo here. And if we zoom out, we can see we're getting the Canucks logo there on the bump channel, right? So it's actually raised and lowered. If I were to come over here to that bump strength, which I told you to definitely chill out, right? Because by default it's like a 20 or something. When you start dialing these bump channels up too strong, you start getting a lot of this like jagged nonsense, right? Because it's really amplifying the slight differences between the pixels. And so, you know, a little bit. Here we go. And in this case, we want to tile this some more. And so on my wall here, I'll select the actual tag, because that allows me to do the tiling here. Remember, when you see U and V, you think what two things? Horizontal and vertical. Yeah, the vertical is easy, right? U is the one, you know, because it's U, V, X, Y, Z. And so if we don't want to distort it, so these two numbers need to stay the same. And so let's say 10, 10. And now that gives me that pattern on that wall. Maybe a little bit smaller. 4, 4. Like that. By making that smaller, sort of gives a little bit more scale to this part. That's cool. I think on the, what did I do on the sharks one? Did I use it on both? Well, here it's on the bump. Over here, it's on the roughness. I don't know if I'm feeling that this morning. Maybe let's, here's the light gray that we used for something. Let's put that on the other side here. And so I'll duplicate that, control drag, call this light gray logo, double click, and we'll say no bump channel, but on the reflectance, I'm going to come over to, not the diffuse, because that's, if I wanted to actually change the color, that's where I would put it. I want to go to the reflection roughness. And so let's grab that same PNG. And it's going to be hard to make heads or tails of what you're doing just looking at the ball. So let's go ahead and add this over here. And there we can see something happening. You can see a little bit of it there. Kind of looks like trash. See how pixelated it is? Part of that is we're in the, what type of renderer are we using right now? The viewport render, right? Because I want you guys to be able to, the viewport render is going to render this thing super fast, right? Like it shouldn't take you more than like 3 or 4 minutes to render it. Once we go through a few iterations and get this cleaned up, I'll have everybody switch to the real nice renderer that may take like an hour, 2 hours to output, but you don't want to be wasting your time doing all these super high quality renders for stuff that you know you're going to change, right? I do this all the time with clients. You know, you're giving people test renders, you know, rough drafts that you can iterate quickly, and then later, once it's more dialed in, you can do the real sweet looking one. The reason this looks super pixelated is that there's a limit to the pixel resolution that the viewport renderer uses by default. So if I go up here to this left wall tag, double click here, there is a viewport setting, and then there is a texture preview size. I'm going to bump that up, and now we can see that that looks respectable. We got to change the tiling. I probably don't want it exactly the same as the other one. What did I end up doing, like 4? I don't remember. Let's try 7. 7, 7. And so there.
What's the difference between using the reflection and versus the
It's subtle in the results, but you can sort of see here, like this is not.
It's not big, like extruded. It's not embossed. So to speak.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the main thing.
That's, yeah, the bump channel, you can think of it as, you know, the emboss channel. It's embossing stuff, right? This is more like it's etched into it. Yeah. So yeah, in the interest of just creating, you know, something more visually interesting. Like I've got the one etched over here, and I've got that one embossed over there.
If you want to bring in the color, how is it that it comes in from the file without color? Because you don't have the color check?
Right, because I didn't put it on the diffuse channel, or the diffuse layer on the reflectance channel. If I were to come in here under color and brought it in,
Bring it in there. I see, yeah.
then we would actually see the logo. It's a little busy for, I think, what we want to get to here. I don't know. It's sports, you know. Yeah, that's not going to tint it. Yeah, so here under the diffuse layer color, brought it in there. So now it's functioning on both, right? It is still doing the roughness stuff, but then also has the color. And so you could actually chill this out down here with this mix strength. Sort of, you know, give it a little of that. Yeah, I like that. It kind of looks like it's like kind of glassy. Dig it. We'll go with that. Cool. All right. So now let's get all of our players on the field, so to speak. I'm going to extend these walls because I'm going to put in, let's get our camera move going maybe. And I'm just going to take the rectangles and maybe extend them out. Just to give myself some more room.
The tree reflection in the sky, is that intentional?
We're getting there. That's the default sky. So yeah, we don't want to have that. We'll get, because now, before, that's always in every Cinema 4D file, but we haven't really noticed it because we haven't really been dialing in some super shiny stuff. And so now we can adjust that by just bringing in our own sky, just like we did before. So we can come over here to Studio, and I'm trying to remember, material, yeah. And so we got to make a new sky. You see that gets rid of the tree reflection, but it replaces it with just a gray void, right? Which is not really doing anything for our reflections now. It just makes everything sort of more gray. And so now I could grab one of these studio materials here and throw it on my sky. The sky itself, right, so this one has some dark areas and some light areas. You can't move it, but you can hit R and orbit it or rotate it. And that allows you to really see what's going on with the light. They do have an orientation, but for these skies, I'm just trying to come up with something where I'm getting some interesting reflections going on. Let's try this one. Sometimes it'll take a second to update that. Don't crash, don't crash. Because it's sending it to the GPU. That's why in the Viewport Render it's faster. Oh, man. Oh, man. There we go. All right, just a little laggy there for a second. Cool. All right, so now with this sky, yeah, I think I like the other one better. I'm going to save. That's for sure. I'm going to save incremental. Cool. This reflection's a little too clear. If you double click on the material, every texture that you load into any channel can have a blur applied to it. Again, too perfect, right? If I come in here and I make something default 100% reflective, it becomes this perfect mirror, right? Just sort of doing that allows it to be here. And, well, we're not going to see it in the background. I don't know. We have some lights in the background there. I think that works in general. I want to move this wall a little bit further over. Notice that the wall also has the rounding on it. That's important. The projection on the wall might look weird. Like if you look at the sides, they may not look so great. Well, we can't even tell the way we have it mixed, so it's fine. We're not going to see the sides. We just want to look over here. So let's go ahead and group some stuff together here. I don't think we need these, whatever these were. Oh, those are just the old splines. I'm just going to do some organizing. So the lights in the sky, I'll grab those and press Alt-G. Start calling this Studio so that all the stuff is, easy to find under there. I'm going to fold up the whole connects thing for right now. Here's my two walls. That's pretty good. Let's get our camera going. So here, this is going to be one instance where we're going to want to use some easing with the camera motion, right? Sort of a pullback. And we don't ever want the camera to sort of come to a complete stop in this thing. Pull back and probably like a little bit of drift and then a zoom. In the Sharks one, I may have messed up the camera here. I think there's keyframes on this. Yeah. Yeah, sort of a pull back, and then, this transition out of it is, on TV, they'd be using this to go to something else, right? And so here we're just sort of, zooming in, then switching to the other, whatever comes next. So let's set something up like that. 3 points. So I'm going to go ahead and make I think this one works best with just like we made the target light, the target camera. Same thing. It's going to make a camera and a target. And so this allows us just to animate the movement and have it always point at the logo, which is what we want in this project, right? So if I go to camera target, or target camera rather, target camera, there we go. And I'm going to look through the camera. I'll come up here to the top. Let me close this window, there we go. These lights, I'm just going to turn off in the editor for a second so we can focus on the camera. So it's a target camera. Here's the camera, here's the target. If I move the camera, it always points at the logo, right? And if we look at it over here, it allows me to do this kind of animation pretty easily, where I don't have to worry about rotation and position. I can just animate the position. You see that it's a little high up, so I'm going to take the camera target and move mine down more to where I want that. And so I'm going to start with, well, let's get our timing figured out here. Control D for our project settings. We haven't animated anything yet. Let's get our house in order. 24 FPS. We are going to want ours 96. I feel like those are a little short. They could be a little bit longer. So let's say 24 times. Let's say 120 frames. That's 5 seconds at 24 FPS. 24. That's all good there. And so now I can start by just sort of starting up close, coming out, and then zooming back in. And I usually try to go like in some kind of like U shape, right? So that we're kind of tilting as we move. And so here at the beginning, I'm not going to animate the target. The target just stays where it is, just the camera. And I'm just going to set position coordinates here. And so let's start here at the beginning. Click, click, click. Go to the middle. Move it out. kind of there. Click, click, click. Go to the end and move it in. Click, click, click. Remember, our default frames in Cinema 4D, our default keyframes are going to be ease in, ease out. So that's not a bad path. I don't mind that. The motion feels a little lethargic for a high energy hockey game. So let's maybe expand this area here by adjusting some of our curves. So I'm going to come over to the camera, right click and say animation, show F curve. Oh, is that what this does now? Puts it down here. All right, that works. So now we could adjust some of these. You see that we're not moving at all on the Y. That's probably fine. What if we had a little bit of dip in the middle? What would that look like? You know, where it moves down. I like that. It gives us a little bit of an angle. Maybe here in the middle. Gives it a little bit more three-dimensionality. We need some more velocity at the beginning. And I'm going to go ahead here and curve these a little bit more. Like so. So we start off faster and drift. Same thing on the X. Just clicking and tuning the handle. This is exactly what we did on the impact. There we go. So now we get off of that faster. And we kind of drift into that position. Same thing at the end. We want some more velocity finishing this thing off. And so I'm going to kind of do this thing. Feels sluggish. I'm gonna grab the whole thing. Let's move it over. How does it feel at 96?
The view of rotation is coming from the camera only, the camera position only.
Yeah, I haven't moved anything. The only thing we've keyframed is the camera. Yeah, that's it. Yep, my original instincts were better. I'm going to say 96 frames. I don't know, it's Wednesday. Because we're going to add some more stuff here. So that part in the middle where it seems a little, right now, there's going to be stuff going on. So I think we're okay there. Cool. Going to save. And now we want this right here. I definitely want this to happen, right? Where at this point the walls are straight, the logo is in place, things are cool, right? And so well, as I animate some of the other stuff here, I'm probably going to make sure I freeze this point in time and then move on from that. And so here I have the logo, and here I have the two walls. In the San Jose one, I made additional walls. I don't know. We'll do something different this time. So here, maybe we'll make something that open and closes. I've set some keyframes in my camera. So now, even if the camera is on and I start messing with it, when I hit play, it will snap back to the keyframe positions. So once you set keyframes on the camera, paying attention to this becomes slightly less high stakes in that you're not going to bump your camera or whatever. But I'm going to turn it off so I can see what I'm doing. Let's create some vertical walls, maybe just with some cubes. And so let's do something like this and like this, pretty thin. Move it over, make it a little bit taller. Again, I want those rounded corners. Let's make it a little bit thicker, I guess. So under Object in the cube, I'll just hit Fillet. See, that rounds that corner. So now I've got a wall here. I could Control drag down, get another wall there. Let's call this one top.
Fillet? Not cap. Fillet?
Yeah, the words that mean rounding. There are distinctions to these things. However, like either they're not clear to me or the way that they're used in the program is not consistent. So when you're dealing with you'll see the words rounding, you'll see the word bevel, you'll see the word fillet, you'll see the word chamfer.
Yeah.
All delineate some version of taking a sharp surface and rounding it. So yeah, I would appreciate it if that was more consistent, but this is bottom. Let's put some materials on these walls. So I'll use some of the ones I already used. How about this one and that one. There we go. If we go back to the beginning, let's look through the camera. There we are. Yeah, I'll move this one down just slightly. Move this one down a little bit. There we are, right at the beginning. So I want these to sort of open up at the beginning. Let's just grab Y, just Y. Just want to keyframe the Y, keep it simple. And so there they are. And then maybe by the time we're here, they're open. And so this one has to go this way. Keyframe it. This one has to go that way. Keyframe it. There we go. I want that one out of the shot. So let's look at that. Once you add keyframes to things, if they don't show up down here, you should be able to drag them. Yeah. The other thing I'm going to do with the camera here is it has that default 35mm focal length. Let's try 45. Yeah, that's better. you see that we never get the whole logo on screen there? I think that's okay in this instance, right? Again, we're communicating scale in that the world exists outside the edges of the frame. If I wanted these walls to close up at the end, I already have 2 keyframes, right? So I can just control drag and then control drag and just sort of making them opposite. So I'm taking the last one, dragging that first, and the second one dragging this one. This is the keyframe editor here in Cinema. I like that a lot. That's cool, especially on loop like that. Remember, if you can't see something in the window here, H recenters it, renormalizes the view so you can see what you're doing. Cool, let's give it a little bit more action. And so the logo itself here, I'm going to have this move forward slightly. And so I'll come over here to the coordinates. Again, we're just doing position. I think we're just going to do Z position. So that's all I'm going to keyframe. Z. I'll back it up a little bit here and back this out so that that has some kind of motion there. Keyframe there. If I bring this in, now I can see the keyframes for that. Let's give it a little bit of overshoot. So control click allows you to make a new point here. And so that if I create a new point here and drag it out, now I'll shoot past that point and come back to it. Kind of like that. That's a little slow. I'm going to move these closer together, make that a little snappier. Maybe give this one a little bit more ease out. This needs to happen a little bit earlier. Move it this way a little bit. There we go. Cool. And now with the walls, our 2 walls here, maybe give those just a little bit of angular movement. And so in the middle, I want them where they are. So let's look at the rotation. Which one do we want to rotate? Nope, not that one. Yeah, that one. Doing this is also going to give us way more light action, right? Because the camera's moving, so we're going to get lights traveling around from that. But if we get our wall rotating as well, then we're going to get something more interesting happening there as well. Just more light movement. So let's keyframe there. Back it up. Maybe give it a little keyframe here. And then at the end, so just the rotation there that we're looking at. If I go to H, you can see what happened there. And we can do the same thing with the other wall. So it should be the same rotation. Yeah, there we go. So we want that at 0. See how I always start in the middle? Because I know I want to hit in the middle. That's where it's most viewable, right? We're at the right angle, and I want to make sure that in the middle we're hitting that hero frame. And so I make sure that to add a keyframe there at the beginning, so that everything hits that spot, and then at the beginning I can. Yeah, let's have this one go the other way. Kind of like that. Like that. So if we look at those should be opposite. Yeah, they're going opposite directions. These two frames here is where it hits the middle part, and so maybe that's lined up. Let's save. Could use a little bit more energy, but at this point, this would be not bad, right? We got something that kind of works here. We've got things moving, things are in motion. Some of the other things, we could do here in terms of icing on the cake.
I have to ask something. This is not it's a question because I want to know the solution to it. So you have that one piece of the wall that's moving forward because it's extruded, that one underneath the layout.
Oh yeah, it does
Black.
go through there.
It just doesn't look like it makes sense with the rest of the wall.
Yeah, this one
Why
here.
Why is that activated to the human?
Yeah, that's
So how do you
part of the
ungroup
rotation.
that? Do you have to ungroup it from the spline?
Oh, if I didn't want this piece of the wall to move?
Yeah, because it's not. Yeah, it doesn't really. What's the rest of the wall doing?
It's rotating. We're not seeing a whole bunch of it because we got to move some of the
I
lights.
just do see that, and it just doesn't look. It looks like a piece of something and not a wall. It's that's your thing. But what I'm saying is, if I wanted to ungroup, like, how can I not have that do that? Is it an ungroup from the spline, or is it a?
Yeah, we need to split that into separate parts.
Split it in some-
So the left wall here, let's get out of the camera. If we didn't want this piece to move here, these two things together make that. So we would need to duplicate that and same kind of thing we did with the, what did we do with this on Monday where we duplicate and delete? We did that with some component. Can't remember what. Anyways, if we duplicate this, but in order to select the parts, we would need to press C. It would turn everything into a mesh. And so now you could grab specific sets of things to delete them. Right, so this thing up here could become that middle part. And so if I grab this, another useful command, UW, selects all the connected stuff. This is not connected. So I'll delete that from there. And on this one, I'll click here and say UW and delete that one.
So you're deleting it from the moving wall that you duplicated?
They're both moving right now, but yeah, on the one that'll be just the middle, I'll just delete the keyframes.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so this is just middle part. And it has keyframes here. Right click, animation, delete track. Here, we want to just get rid of this part. UW and delete. And so now, there we go, that stays put now. That looks better. Let's put all of that stuff together. So middle part, left wall, right wall. And the other thing I did with the San Jose one was bringing in just those lines that went across. We talked about this in the real and surreal. The cloner object is your friend here to sort of create a field of things. First thing you want to do is define the shape of the field. So I'm going to go ahead and just grab a cube, saying like, where do I want these lines? I wouldn't use spheres for this. I don't know. We already have all these lines with the boxes. And so I want these things to kind of be in this zone. Right about there. We'll call this clones space. I'm going to just turn it off here and here so we don't see it. And then the cloner, bring that in. And let's make one line. So bring this one in, sort of adjust, kind of make a thin, long thing. I think I want it to be smaller than that. Again, I want rounded corners. Kind of like so. So we'll call this line. There we go. So now, we have the cloner, we have the thing that we want to clone, and then we have the space that we want to put the stuff in. The line goes underneath the cloner, and you see that immediately gives us a couple more lines. In the cloner, I wish this was the default. The default is that it just makes a grid of stuff, which is not that useful. Much more useful is putting clones in the space of another object. So I switch, watch what, the cloner is super deep object. When I switch the mode, all of this stuff down here changes because the options are totally different. So you go to object, and now I get a field for like what object. I can say this one. And so now it puts those, and there's different ways to align clones to an object. I'll turn this on so we can see it. The default here is that it just randomly places them on the surface, like so. That's not exactly what we want. We want volume. And so I'll turn that off. And so it just randomly fills the volume with the clones. And we get this nice slider down here, which essentially becomes our density. More or less, just super easily dial it in. This clone here is just another object. We can put anything we want on it. So if we put this material on it, they're all dark. Let's see how this looks with our camera move. So this is super cool, right? The space, we can fill it with all these things. It's very, you can create this like complexity really easily. The downside here is that we don't really have explicit control over each clone, right? We're sort of randomly filling the volume. And in our case here, let's see. I thought we'd see more than that, but let's see. I'm going to move this cloner spaces back. I'm going to make this space a little smaller. There we go. That's more aligned with what we have going on. And so if those are too much in the way, we could just move the space and sort of art direct this to some sort of situation that we would like. Or in the cloner, we can just turn up the density, turn it down. It goes up to 100 here, but you can dial beyond that. This is important. I said it just randomly fills the volume, right? The computer is incapable of randomness. It doesn't, it's a deterministic machine. Seed is the random version. And so it fakes randomness by using a really complex algorithm. That algorithm has some sort of input number. That input number is called a seed. This is better, in most instances, this is better than true randomness, like whatever random is when we flip a coin in the real world, however random we may or may not think that is. This is repeatable randomness, right? So you can get different versions of randomness by changing the seed. It doesn't matter what the value is, it just matters that it's different from another value. And so this allows me to just infinitely search the multiverse of random volume clones here. I can just sort of sort through until I find one I like. And it's consistent. So if I put this, if the seed is the same, I'll get the same random result, which isn't super important given our setup here, but it becomes significant if you use this kind of tool a lot.
You can move the cube that's the boundary of the clone, correct? If you wanted to, say you wanted to make if it was really irritatingly in the way, you could make maybe 4 different clone space cubes and just make a space for the camera. Does that make sense or not? So you have your you have your clones within different size spaces.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, you could duplicate this whole setup, and if you really wanted to make sure none of them
Right.
ran into the camera, you could.
Animate out, like, just to get rid of them if the cameras.
Yeah, yeah. You could put a whole bunch up here, a whole bunch down
Yeah,
here,
yeah, yeah.
all that kind of thing. Sure. Again, the camera's not going to run into them; it'll just go through
Yeah.
the objects, right?
Right.
But
If you have it, if you are zooming, you're gonna zoom in if you don't want it.
yeah. Like that's kind of like in the eye there now. We don't want that. So let's clear that out a little bit. So yeah, the two ways to adjust it are either moving the space itself or adjusting the size of the space or coming into the cloner and sort of dialing it in that way. Other cool thing about the cloner is you can clone multiple things. So if we control drag this line, if I want different colored lines now, I'll put a blue one on this. And now some of my lines are blue, some of them are black. You can do this as much as you want. So get rid of that one. Now I've got gray lines and blue lines and black lines. We're only seeing those there. So let's give us a little more variety. These are too thick in that direction. Grab all of them. There we go. I like that better. This also, because they're in three-dimensional space, it gives the whole thing more, parallaxing and interest going on. If we wanted even more interest, you could even animate the space, depending on what you're doing. Let's see what that looks like. So here's the clone space. I'm going to have that these can be sort of traveling along this way. So I'll have them start off here. And we only need to animate the X. Again, I'm avoiding hitting the keyframe all the transform things down here because I'm keyframing a lot of things and having them all create 9 keyframes instead of 1 is, maybe not great. It just becomes harder to keep track of. Let's save that. Let's save incremental.
With your light, you don't have shadows selected. Is that correct? Is that intentional?
No, I think the shadows are just, a lot of them are getting washed out from other lights at this point. Let's see. I think we turned on shadows. Yeah, we got shadow map soft. So I'm going to hit Control R, sort of look at the other version of it here, where some of the shadowing may be more or less distinct. Let's look at the light. It'd be cool if there was a brighter shadow over here. So it's going to be a balance of things at this point. Right now you're in the lighting world. So we have our sky, which is contributing, right? So that may or may not be doing some of these highlights that we're seeing. And then we have our lights that are contributing. Let's turn those back on so we can see them. Move this one up maybe. Yeah, so we're getting more action from our shadows there, from those clones on the wall. It breaks things up a little bit. What if this one came over a little bit? There we go. That gives me a little bit more shadow on that. I dig that better. Let's save. Cool. All right. Let's go with that. I am also going to go save project with assets. We do have external assets now. We brought in that PNG. The program is still not reading the AI file. Like it takes the AI file and then stores it in Spline, but we need the PNG. So let me make a new folder. Canucks. That's how you spell Canucks. And come up here, make sure my Viewport Render, just press this button, copy from Viewport. We went over that on Monday. Filter, make sure I got that geometry only. So I'm just seeing the geometry. Make sure this is set to Viewport. Output, we want to do a quick version. So 1280 by 720 is fine. I mean, either way, we're in the Viewport Renderer, so it'll be fast. Make sure your frame rate reflects the correct frame rate. So we'll say 24. We want to say all frames. And under save, we want to be making a PNG because we're going to bring this into After Effects and do our thing. We're doing the first draft of this. So I'm going to show you something and regret it. You can make a movie directly out of Cinema 4D. We don't do this because we are making MP4. This is, if you were to do this, you are compressing it at this point, right? So in this instance where you're just showing somebody something, you're like, okay, here, check this out. This is great. For actual work where you don't want to lose any quality, you definitely want to make an image sequence. But we'll make that MP4. And we will call it Canucks logo animation on arena. The other downside to doing this is that if the computer crashes while you're rendering the MP4, you lose, you're putting all your eggs in one basket. You lose the basket. If you make a PNG sequence and the computer crashes while you're rendering, you can pick up where you left off. Like you're like, well, I got 84 frames. You can start rendering on frame 85 and continue on. So yeah, this is like for quick previews. Let's do it. So there we go, and render. And we're done. That's how fast the Viewport Render is, right? Because it's literally just recording. It's like you're using OBS to record your screen, right? The Viewport Render is fast enough that we can see it while we're working, right? And so, cool. Come back over here to something. Where did I put it here? Connects. MP4 file. Cool. That's cool. Those lines going across definitely give it a little bit more interest in happening. Let me save. Let's talk about our global level workflow here, right? We talked about, we summed everything up on Monday. Illustrator file, organizing layers, extruding, anchor points. If you get all of that right, it makes this part much, much easier. So what did I do today? Build set, right? Which in this case was the walls. I made the horizontal and vertical walls. My horizontal walls, what did I use to get the logo cut out? What was that thing?
Create
Spline Mask. Spline Mask. Well, if you want to create outlines of the logo, then that's the create outline thing. Create outline. Being sure to adhere to our first principles in terms of shapes, which is rounded corners, so that the light catches it. The build studio, right? And so I had 2 target lights. What did I do there? I did some variations in brightness. I did slight variations in color. I also did, position. Make sure one is on one side, one is on the other side. This is something students do at the beginning, is that they have their camera, and then like all of the lights end up on one side of the camera, which is, in general, not what you want, usually. What else did I do? I brought in the sky object, and then I looked for a studio material in the asset browser. That gets rid of those weird default trees that you'll see in the back in the reflections. And the final part of my studio was the target camera. Functions exactly like the target light, except the camera just points at the target. Then I got to animating. First thing I did was animate camera position. Also 24 FPS, 96 frames, seems like a sweet spot. I get all that rotational action for free because I have a target camera, right? It's always pointing at the thing. The camera position was primarily like a U shape. I'm on one side close, come out, and go back in at the end. Then I animated the logo moving forward. Then I gave the walls movement and rotation. Again, you don't need to exactly duplicate what I do here, right? We're just creating movement in these things. And then at the end, like icing on the cake, cloned other objects, right? I just used some cubes. Sort of stretched them out, made them kind of look like what I wanted. I ended up giving those some, I animated the clone space, so that they looked like they were moving across the screen. just in order to create this hole in the wall, I copy pasted my outside layer. Okay, so depending on which logo you choose, that may or may not work for you. Some of them will be organized like that, other ones will not. Like that may not work quite as well if I way back when, if I would have made a decision to keep the Vancouver across the top, you know, like I really just wanted to see.
So after you copy pasted, you opened it into like another file.
Right, I was just doing that to demonstrate, right? So you don't necessarily need to do, you can do it in the same file. A lot of times when I'm showing you guys stuff out, you know, just to keep things, allow us to focus on one thing, I'll bring it into a new file so we can see exactly how just that thing works. Right, so you don't need to do that. The important thing is we have two parts here. We have this is essentially the outermost part of the Canucks logo, right? And that's the one I copied and pasted. And then I have a rectangle. And if both of those go inside the spline mask, there we go, just like that. Then the order matters here because it's in subtraction mode, so it's got to be the other way. That gives me that spline. The cool thing here is that this is still editable, right? So if I need to like adjust this, I can move these things independently, which is super slick.
And then you just Control-C, Control-D that rectangle to make the other wall dimension.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, I did the whole thing. And then if you move the rectangle, it gives you the whole thing.
I'm never gonna get that. I just don't see it. I don't, and well, when you finished that, then you dragged it like a Photoshop thing and dragged it into the other project?
Yeah, I didn't drag, I just Control-C,
Oh, you did. You
go to the other one,
all-
Control-V.
all- Just selected them all, Control-C, and then dropped them in.
Yeah, it's not the end of the world. I mean, with the
Nice.
spline mask thing, if you end up using, you know, a cube that is part of the background, it's really going to function just as well. It's a pretty tiny detail, right, as far as like making this cutout in the wall.
It's used in
Hmm.
like 99% of these, like everywhere. Everyone I looked at yesterday, you pulled up close and it has many cutouts of cutouts of cutouts. Like what's the one, that NBA one? That's beautiful. One of those studios. It's beautiful, and I want to be able to do it, but it's not a process that I'm grasping right now. I'll get it.
There's a lot to get in this one, right? So, I mean, grab the fruit you can grab. Yeah.
Well, I don't know, like, why did you draw a rectangle and not, you said rectangle, and you dropped down all these menus, and you dropped down a menu that wasn't a cube, it was a rectangle.
Yeah, that's because it's a spline, not a piece of polygon geometry. It's a spline.
So you're
Right.
not really doing anything with a rectangle, you just selected a rectangle because that's what the spline is, correct? Yeah.
Yeah. This is, if you just click it, it gives you a rectangle. But if you click and hold, you can make any of these
And so
splines.
where did you go to get the spline?
here.
You did.
Yeah.
You did use a rectangle.
Yeah. Yeah. The rectangle is a flat 2D thing.
So sort of like
The
the
cube.
shape builder idea where you have to
Mm-hmm.
have
Yeah.
something to drop this outline into, just subtract.
Yeah. Yeah. The spline mask is conceptually the same as the shape builder. Right. If you had to do a ton of this, I might, you know, go over to Illustrator, do it over there, and then bring all of that over here the same way.
I
Yeah.
don't know that one any better than this, but I'm just like,
So-
it just looks familiar.
There's a lot of overlap in Illustrator, you know, spline tools and then spline tools over here, you know. Because, you know, this is not an Adobe program, right? It's, you know, they're separate. But, I mean, Illustrator's been around for a long time. It's probably the program I think is least irritating in terms of.
Least irritating?
Yeah, I mean,
For me,
After Effects
it's
is
completely the most.
After Effects is After Effects. You know,
Yeah.
I just don't use Photoshop anymore because I just do it in After Effects. You know, even if I have to do a still image, I just don't even really do it.
Illustrator for me is for people who don't know how to draw and now can create. But for me, like I know how to draw, so I don't need to go through all this shape building and dragging. I just pick up my Apple Pen and I draw. But now I don't have a vector, so then I end up in Procreate, and then the game changes.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, for me, Illustrator is why there's so much reductive art around now. But that's another.
Yeah, it
conversation.
definitely
But it
resulted in
allows
that
this
style.
To happen. It allows you to be able to do this.
Yeah. Cool. Let me post. I want to sub some of the things out on this assignment so that people don't get confused about what you had to do to use this before. Why don't you guys get started and then I'll answer questions for you. Oh, I got to answer everybody's questions, actually. Let me download those too. Where's that? Where are we at here? 4, 3, 4. Yeah. Did you pick a logo?
Yeah, I think it was the Carolina Hurricanes.
Shadow here. As you can see, the shadow starts from here, and if I make it bigger, it changes the shape and the size of the shadow, which is not the size and the shape that I want. So I decided to keep it as is. Thank you. In draft animation, I was having a problem with the shadow here. As you can see, the shadow starts from here, and if I make it bigger, it changes the shape and the size of the shadow, which is not the size and the shape that I want. So I decided to keep it as is. Thank you.
Yep, Aubrey, that's good. I honestly didn't notice that in your resubmission. The shadows I thought looked good.
For my second draft, I had trouble with
So when it plays, I think it's duplicating behind the gerbils. And I tried to, or I got rid of the drop shadow that I had on the gerbils, but that didn't seem to work. And when I added the shadows, the same thing also applied on the shadows. This right here and up here too. So when it plays, I think it's duplicating behind the gerbils. And I tried to, or I got rid of the drop shadow that I had on the gerbils, but that didn't seem to work. And when I added the shadows, the same thing also applied on the shadows.
Zaria, it's hard to see. I haven't seen that happening to other students. Do you have something besides a drop shadow layer style on there that's doing that? I would need you to drill down more on your gerbil comp so that I can see exactly what the layers are there. I can just see that you pre-comp the whole thing. Yeah, I don't think this needs any layer styles at all. I don't know what would be doing that without being able to look further down into that comp. If you have a chance, make another recording where we can see what's in here, and if there's any other layer styles, turn those off. Post that on Slack when you have a chance, please.
I was a little behind from class. I don't get my feedback yet, but I'm watching feedback from the other project, and I have learned from those a lot. About animate the object further, so I may use that for my project. So that's all for this week.
Cool. I'll probably have a chance to look at yours later today, Lamb.
Good evening. I was wondering if you wanted the credits to be in the description, or if you wanted the credits to be on their own separate scene.
Just put your name at the end and include the soundtrack in the description.
The credits, it says to include your credit for the soundtrack, but then in the lecture, you state to post it in the description. So I just want to get that clarified.
Yep, put it in the description.
This is where I was viewing it from as well. And I just wanted to have this clarified just to make sure, so like in the future when we make our own scenes, we know the correct way on how.
Yep, put the music in the description. There's some weird noise gating happening in the middle there.
For Art 184, I was curious as to how to create a sun haze effect where heat waves are rippling across the desert sand background. Possibly even a dynamic sun ray effect that applies a tinted color overlay over a moving creature's back until they move into a specific shaded area.
Two things. Let me get After Effects. While that's launching, let me look at Steph's.
So I was wondering why in After Effects sometimes when you copy and paste it distorts it, like here, the wings. like the wings on this just start to stretch out. I noticed this on the Powerfly one as well. So that's my question. Thank you.
That's that. You have to make sure that everything in the hierarchy is at 100% scale. If you have things that are not at 100% scale, remember, I tried to be really clear about that in the robot arm video, that you can get that kind of distortion happening. And so the way to fix that would be to pre-compose the whole thing and then copy and paste the pre-comp, so that you're not copying and pasting all the layers. So it's scaling the pixels rather than the layers at that point. That would help that part. Run. Much quieter.
As I can, and I'm working with the second draft right now after seeing some stuff I can improve on. But my question this week is actually about this thing I've been seeing on social media called the New Deal for Animation. And as far as I know, it seems to be people from animation studios for like Netflix, Disney, and other studios are trying to get some sort of union. The Animation Guild Union is trying to get the workers in those fields to get paid more. It's kind of like the general gist I got, but I was curious if you, Professor, knew anything more about this or what's been going on around this, because I found it very interesting, because our course deals with stuff in that field, so I was curious what that's all about.
Yeah, there's a few things that triggered this. Like when the pandemic happened, a lot of these studios went and really leaned on animation because it could be done remotely. And then once things changed, kind of like threw everyone under the bus, which is lame. There's also a bunch, this comes up at Oscar season every year, that animation is animation is a medium, it's not a genre. But in the Academy recognizes it as a best animated film, which is just dumb, in my opinion. But it's an award show, so the Oscars are not a bastion of progressive thinking. There's a lot of things you could point to there as far as the Academy being behind the times. Yeah, and then I don't know the specifics, but yeah, the unionization part of it is super important. I totally support that 100%. As far as people getting paid what they're worth, especially with the amount of work these kind of things take. I mean, everyone now has an intimate familiarity with the amount of work it takes to do this stuff, right? It's a lot of people drop off in the class, right? For those of you not here, we're down to 2 people in person. How many do we have at the beginning? Maybe like 5 or 6, plus the people online.
There were 2 here.
Yeah. Anyways, there's a lot of, we've got like 10 still going-ish, right around there. Anyways, it's the kind of thing where a lot of people are like, oh, I'd be really into that, but then, figure out it's a bunch of work and then aren't as into it. It's just part of the thing. But, I've been following all those tags on Twitter as well. But, awards, sure, is it great to win an Oscar? Yeah, great. Would I turn one down? No. But, come on. The Oscars, I seem at least like they're kind of getting good stuff in the awards, as opposed to the Grammys. Like the Grammys seem the most divorced from reality, as far as I can tell.
The most what?
Divorced from reality, as far as what is this what people are listening to? Some of these records are selling a lot, I guess, but
Well, this is because now you can. There's a million people producing songs every day. You don't need
Yeah,
The record company studios anymore, you don't need that.
yeah, at all. Where?
With Spotify. Like when everybody listens to the radio, you used to know what the hits were. But
Yeah.
now you don't know what they are because there's people posting every day to Spotify. YouTube.
Okay, so Trinity, two things. Heat distortion. I suppose the quickest way to that is going to be turbulent displace. So not turbulent noise, but turbulent displace combines a displacement effect with turbulent noise. So if I put this on here, you can see that we can wobble this more or less. Well, that got weird. So it's referencing a noise layer and then displacing the pixels based on that. And if we turn up if we animate the evolution here in some way, then it'll wobble over the course of the clip. That's way too strong there, but you can dial in the amount, maybe something smaller like 10. And there's a couple different ways you could limit the effect. I mean, one would be just to duplicate the layer and then mask out the part you wanted to have the turbulent noise on it. And so here I'll remove it from the bottom one. I'm going to turn it up here so that it's obvious. Right, so now that effect is confined to just the mask part. And you could feather that mask. Sort of fade between the two. Right, so you could just have it in that zone. So you could do your heat displacement that way. The size, right, this is more like funhouse mirror. If we turn this down, we can get to something more like heat displacement. And turn the amount down, maybe 20. Right, and that's more subtle heat ripple kind of look. The other one was light rays. There's a bunch of things here. The one I use, I think most often is CC light rays. And so if you put that on a layer, you get this point that you can move around, and it's as if light is coming from said point. And you can see most clearly here, like with there's dark and bright areas. And so the intensity of this can be cranked up or down. So those would be the two things. There's a bunch of different ways to do these kind of light rays effects, but this is the one that I end up using most of the time. You know, just it's quick, and you know, we're just dealing with this one point, which I can kind of point wherever the light is coming from, and we can go from there. So turbulent displace for the heat rays, and then CC light rays for light rays would be the two. Excellent question, as always. Is that all the questions? I think that was everybody.
If you wanted to do like on the desert, you're describing it, so I mean, like the heat coming up from the desert, you would mask just the lower part and do the turbulent displacement on the lower part and feather it.
Yeah. Just stock video. You could also do it with an adjustment layer and just mask the adjustment layer. I'm not sure the result would be visually different. Let me see.
Apply the turbulent displacement to the adjustment layer.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. I think that would work. Let me try it. So right click, new adjustment layer, turbulent displace, there we go, and then just mask out the part.
The evolution is zero, but now it's 4.
Yeah, this isn't animating.
This one?
The value's not updating. Like this is.
That's at that point with the keyframe.
Yeah. Like the control isn't moving, but I animated that value. The other route here is still using displacement, but then using particles. I'll grab this one. Yeah, so there's a bunch of particle system stuff. CC particle systems 2. There we go. That gives us, just switching it to like, there's some presets on this one, which allows people to do some stuff pretty quickly. So that one works here. Just going to make the producer wider. Right, and so now the thing that has this over turbulence is that they'll have this upward motion. Particle, we'll make it some sort of bubble, or maybe circle or something. There we go. And I'll move this down. And I'll make them live way less. Okay, and so now we can use this to drive our displacement. So make a new adjustment layer. I'm not going to use turbulent displace, I'll just use displace. Not time displacement, displacement map. Displacement map now references another layer. In general, since this is an effect, I am going to pre-compose this before I reference it. So we'll move it down. And this will be, you know, heat particles. Come back to the adjustment layer. Which one do we want to use? We want to use heat particles. We want to turn off the actual visual part there. And now this is the amount of displacement. So that gives you that rising motion. This
Turned off the visual, but it's still.
Yeah, it's referencing, it's not rendering that layer, but the displacement effect is referencing these pixels when it displaces the other pixels in the adjustment layer. To slow stuff down in this one, resistance, I think slows things down. There we go, that's a little bit slower. That's probably a better effect. That gives you the, and I don't need to mask it out by controlling the fade of the particles. It gives us that. That's probably a little strong. I mean, just it would depend, right? And so the amount of displacement here. Also, this might be a bit much, so let's blur this, sort of soften it up. Get a Gaussian here. All right, so not quite as bubbly there. But it would depend on the thing. So, you know, turbulent displace would give you a quick option, but if you build it this way, you'd have that upward motion.
Particle what? Particle C? What was that in the effect called particle?
CC particle systems. There's 3 built-in particle systems in After Effects. I usually, they're all, you know, if you're doing a ton of this stuff, people use a third-party thing. You know, I have the other students install the Red Giant Particular, which is super powerful, but maybe a little unwieldy. But yeah, the Particle Systems 2, CC Particle World has more like 3D stuff in it-ish. You can have things bounce off of stuff. And Particle Playground is the super old one, where it's just really simple particle emitter.
And the bubble came from.
That's in the settings there. So we do a lot more particles in Art 200. The Unity particle system makes sense, so it's like way more usable. But you have your particle, and you have how long it's going to live for. What most of them have some sort of built-in physics thing happening, and then the specifics of like what it is that your particle looks like. You can load your own stuff, but then there's a bunch of just built-in objects. If you need to make confetti or something. And so I turn down the longevity of these. Turn up the birth rate. Things will slow down a little bit. But this one's good because it has these presets that at least get you in the door for a few different scenarios.
From that, I mean, you generally then scaling it like you did across the whole frame. You never really.
There's two things. There's the where are the particles coming from, and then the size of the particles. And so in this one, they're coming from something called a producer, and other ones that would be called an emitter. And so there's where is this thing, and then how big is it? So you can spread out the particles to a much greater degree. So we end up with more of like a field of stuff there.
What's another application for it in the desert? Than the heat effect. What's another place you use that?
What, the particle system?
Yeah. You said you use it a lot in R200. What's the
Oh, like all sorts of elemental things is, kind of what you're getting out of there originally. So fire, water, lightning, dust, clouds, all that stuff is best done as some sort of particle system. Like we were using it in Art 200 on Monday. For our asteroids game. Yes, I'm using it as like rocket exhaust. Photon cannon. And the explosion is a particle system.
So After Effects is a predictable shelf life. What's replacing this? Is it Blender, C4, where are people going to use?
The other 2D compositing program that a lot of people use is Nuke. That's the one that has the most.
But so will there still be used for 2D compositing? Or is that
Well, Nuke is like yeah, it's more, all the programs, you know, they do 2D and 3D. You know, it's like not, you wouldn't, Nuke does both, so there's no reason to start another program. And so it's more of like a nodal, instead of layers, you have nodes, which is being built into a lot of the programs. Right, so sort of routing things from one thing to another. Why can I not find a picture of this? Right, so
I've seen those zip diagrams come up for Blender.
I like this better because then you can sort of see the workflow of the whole everything at the same time. But yeah, Blender is getting the most change per time right now because the consortium or whatever that's in charge of its development at this point. So I think Blender might get there first. Because again, you're doing 2D and 3D stuff in Blender and you don't need to worry about something. So it's on my list. We may, you know, I'm gonna start building more and more of this in. The other more procedural, you know, 2D thing is it's not called carousel. I played with it a little bit, but I can't remember the name. I can't remember the name of this right now. Not carousel, not carnival. Calvary, that's it. So they've done a lot. This has been developed for the last 3 or 4 years. But it's definitely tends towards vector-based art looking stuff, and then it's it does a lot of things Cinema 4D does, and you can sort of do them in Cinema without, again, worrying about 2D versus 3D. I mean, for a lot of 2D things, I just do them in Cinema because you can make things look flat here and not need to worry about it. So, you know, for instance, if you just apply the shaders, which is kind of what is happening in Blender as well. Like, we talked about this with the Eve robot. If we use the luminance channel, everything becomes flat. Right, so now it could be something flat from the side, or now I don't need to redraw anything. If I want it to be 3D, I just change the angle, but it still has that flat shading look. This is, you know, part of the power of doing things this way is that the shading is separate from the geometry, which allows you to like really change things out quickly. I mean, it seems like Blender is going to be the thing because it's free.
Yeah.
That's maybe the most important thing. I mean, it's been free forever, but it wasn't developed by, it was open source, but just sort of the regular kind of open source. Yeah, I don't totally. I'll have to look up the history of this because I don't know exactly. In the last like 3 years now, it's you know, they're paying people to work on Blender even though it's still free because of this whole development situation. And so now like the rate of change with it is like orders of magnitude greater. I mean, it's been around for a long time, but before it was just totally open source, where it's just like people worked on it for free in their free time, but now people get paid to develop it, and it has a marketplace around it now. Like, so there's people making lots of tools. There's all sorts of After Effects tools too, but you know, the tool development thing is crazy. You know, all sorts of stuff. And Unity has the same kind of structure for interactive stuff. A lot of free stuff. Some people are making, there's not a whole lot of people making like a living out of making these add-ons, but you know, it's like a series of side gigs or whatever to sort of develop a lot of these things. A handful of them are like big products, but a lot of them are much smaller things. Is Belle not here today? Did she send me a message? It's not like her. Let me look.